Yeah, I made a few notes on that, so I can give you the general timeline
Great.
on where we were when. And let's see. Okay. Well, I'll do it. We'll keep for the first until 1948.
Mm-hmm.
Keith and I were together. We were living in the same home with parents and so on. So
Yeah.
So his timeline is my timeline up until 48. Then I went away to school and he went away. He graduated from high school and I went off to Andover. So we split ways in 1948. But up to 1948, we lived all over. We moved. Both of us were born in Norton, Kansas. Keith was born on July 15th, 1930. And I was born on December 30th, 1931. So in Norton, Kansas. And we left there right after my 4th birthday, which would have been in 1935, or beginning, or another day or two, it was 1936. So we left in 1936 and moved to Louisville, Kentucky. And I remember that well because both of us, well, at that time I was about 5 and Keith was about 7. And we were gathering what we thought was hay for the horses. We'd heard there were horses in Kentucky because of the Derby and so on. And it was actually Excelsior, the stuff you pack things in. The horses would not have touched. But at any rate, we got the idea.
Yeah.
We were going to horse country. And I don't remember much because I was only 4 and a half. About either Louisville, where we just lived for 6 months. I do remember it. I remember the house. I remember one exciting thing where I, at the age of 4 and a half, went upstairs to the 2nd story, and it was a house that had a porch in front of it with a roof that went up to the 2nd story windows,
Mm-hmm.
as a lot of houses do. I went out the 2nd story window, was playing
Mm-hmm.
on the roof, and of course when my brothers, and then even more so my parents, saw that they were wild. They were 4-year-old
Yeah.
walking around. So and I was completely oblivious, and I did that, and then they got me to come off and come back down. But I don't remember much more. It was the year before the Great Flood in the Midwest, and where we lived, which was on the hilly area, and it was a long ways from the lower part of the town, but it flooded all that way, the
Mm-hmm.
Ohio River. Because Louisville is on the Ohio, which can be a raging stream, and it rose that much.
Did you see the flood?
No, fortunately, we had moved from then to, we'd moved twice. We moved from Louisville to Kansas City, Missouri, and we lived there only something like 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
And then we moved to Dubuque, Iowa. And both Kansas City, Missouri is on the Missouri River. We moved to Dubuque, Iowa, which is on the Mississippi, but it was not a flood part of the floodplain. So that happened a year later when we were living in Dubuque, Iowa.
And would you say that was like 1936 or so, 1937?
Yeah, that would be. Let's track it here. Let's see if I have it on. I might have tracked the years. Let's see. Yeah, we moved from Norton to Louisville, and it would have been 1936. Louisville to Kansas City, also in 1936, later in the year. We moved to Dubuque, Iowa in Christmas 1937. I remember it was Christmas time, so in December 1937. We moved 2 years later, and I'm not sure what month, but it's probably June or July after school was out. We moved from Dubuque, Iowa to Monmouth, Illinois. So that would have been 1939.
Okay.
And then we lived in Dubuque, Iowa for 2 years. And we moved to Alexandria, and it must have been about June or July of 1941.
Okay.
Because I remember we were there by the time the war started in December. And then we lived in Alexandria ever after, but in different houses. We lived in Bellefonte, which is down in Delray, here until after the war. Right after the war, my parents bought a house on Mason Avenue, further up off Russell Road, and we lived there. We went to the same schools. Both of us went to Mount Vernon Elementary School. Keith from 5th to 7th grade, and I from 4th to 7th grade. So Keith started high school a year before I did. He started in 1944, and I started in 1945. I remember the war had just ended because I started school in September, and the bomb was dropped in August, and the Japanese surrendered by the end of the month. So the war was just over when I started high school, but Keith had been there for a year. So we were both in high school together for 3 years. Keith and I, Keith's sophomore, junior, and senior year, 3 years, and mine freshman, sophomore, and junior. So for those years Keith did very well in high school. He got good grades. He was a star mathematician, and he was good in science. He was president of the student council. He was elected to that.
Oh, wow.
And he was a star track, he was a state champion and set records for the state of Virginia on the high hurdles. He had a coach that I did a little running too, but nothing like what Keith did. But we had a coach named Fitzgibbon, who was a splendid man, very good old Irishman, and Keith was very fond of him, and he really helped train Keith to do as well as he did. It had a kind of a reverse effect. I was talking with John this morning, and it made me think about it, that because Keith got an athletic scholarship from George Washington High School, where he had done very well and got a lot of prizes and so on, to Duke, which is a very good university in North Carolina. But he went to Duke, and he didn't like to coach for track, and it was a track scholarship. So he decided he competed for the Naval ROTC. It was a program that was just started, where the Naval Reserve Officer Training Corps, they'd had it for college students, and it was entrance by examination. And if you did it and went into the NROT, at this time, everybody, if you didn't do something like this, you were going to be drafted into the Army, because it was still during just after the Second World War, and the draft continued for the 10 years. So all of the young men coming out of high school had to make, unless they had a medical problem or something, had to decide how they were going to do their military service. And Keith took this naval examination, and he did very well in it, and got a scholarship from the Navy for all expenses, for all his own personal, like a salary. It was not a lot, but it was, at the time, it was perfectly adequate to support somebody for food and drink and so on, and he got all his tuitions paid. So he decided, okay, I can go to, you could only go to one of the universities in this country that had the Naval ROTC program, but that was 50-some universities, and almost all of the state universities had the program. But Keith didn't go to a state university. He went to university, what is it?
Duke or UCLA?
Well, this is after Duke. He went to Duke first, and then he took this thing at
in California, in Los Angeles.
California, the University of Southern California, USC, and that University of Southern California, if it had been an independent country, it would have had more track medals in the last Olympics than the United States. Or any other country. It was the mecca for track. If you wanted to, if you were a really good track as a USC, well, this was Keith's calculation, which made sense. And he had the scholarship which said you can go to any of these 50 colleges, which included, at that time, all 48 states and a couple of others. He decided to go to the University of Southern California, which turned out to be a bum decision for reasons he had not calculated on, that is the smog.
Yeah.
Los Angeles had this terrible smog, and they've improved it since then, but it took another 5 years or so before it got to be livable out there for people like Keith that had respiratory. So he had terrible asthma, which was affliction, and he had had it off and on but in Los Angeles it was terrible.
Mhm.
And then he couldn't really compete, he couldn't practice and so on. But he stayed 3 years, I guess, at Southern California. I guess probably a couple of years trying to compete,
Mhm.
not very successfully. And then another year. Then he decided to come back east,
Mhm.
get out of Los Angeles. So he came back in must have been, well, anyway, somewhere, probably about 52 or 53. He came back to University of Virginia, and he spent 2 years. It would have been 52, because he spent 2 years at University of Virginia and graduated from there. But because of the moving around from 3 different colleges, turned out I, who had been 1 year behind him in high school, we both graduated from college the same year in 1954. So we both graduated then. Keith graduated from, where was it, University of Virginia, and I graduated from Yale
Mhm.
in 1948. Actually, in 1947, I had, in 48, I did not go straight to Yale. I never was a freshman at Yale. I got an English-speaking union
Mhm.
scholarship to spend a year at an English school, Christ Hospital, which was an ancient school. It was founded in 1552. It was a school of about 800 boys. Had a very distinctive uniform called the Blue Coat School. You wore knee breeches, gray knee breeches, yellow stockings, and a long blue coat with 14 silver buttons down the front, velvet cuffs. This is the top form, the sixth form, what would be seniors, and this there had this, and those were boys that were going on to university. So that was a wonderful year for me. And Keith, during that year, was he would have been a freshman at University of Southern California. So.
And that was also your first time in Europe?
Yeah, it was.
And also, World War II had just happened. It was really everywhere, and you were getting, you were a bit closer to where, to where the
Well,
European
when I got
front
to
was.
England, you could see the bomb damage.
Yeah.
In the city, particularly in London. And it had been a year, well, by the time I got there was 1950, so it had been 5 years since the end of the war. But, so the bomb damage had been cleared, but you looked at a row of houses, and there'd be one missing here, 2 missing there, and they'd been bombed, and it had been a mess at the time. They were crashed and so on, but they cleared out the debris, so you had these, it was like looking at somebody with missing teeth, there was gaps there and so on. And that was all over London. There were houses because the Germans just bombed indiscriminately, so they did a lot of damage all over.
So you were in England from 48 to 49?
No, I was actually there from, let me see, I think you're probably right, 1948, 49. No, I graduated from Andover in 1950, so I was there from 1950 to 51.
Okay.
And that would have been my freshman year at Yale, but I took it at Christ Hospital. But I took an examination at Oxford while I was there, and Yale gave me credit for a year. So I came back to Yale as a sophomore, so I was never a freshman. So I went on for 3 years and graduated from Yale. At the same time, Keith graduated from University of Virginia. We both graduated in 1954.
And then Keith commissioned in the U.S. Air Force, and you commissioned in the Marines.
He had been in the Naval ROTC in the University of Southern California, and that was all expenses paid. A very good, wonderful thing, but he had to give it up when he came back. So he entered the Air Force ROTC at University of Virginia, and they gave him a commission. So he didn't go on active duty immediately, not in June of 1954, but within 3 or 4 months, I think. And he had only 2 years to serve, so he did that from 54 to 56. And I don't remember exactly when he went on active duty, but it was probably October or so.
Mm-hmm.
And it was about the same with me. I graduated at the same. We both graduated in June 1954. And I enlisted in the Marine Corps Officer Candidate School, and the next course starting was in November, so I had to wait until November to go on active duty. Then I spent 3 months at Quantico going to Officer Candidate. Then I was commissioned in February of 1955, and then they had an officer basic school, which made you into a basic infantry officer, which was about 5 months at that time. So after I finished that in September of 1955, I had orders and went to Japan and joined the 3rd Marine Regiment, 3rd Marine Division, which was in a camp down not far from Yokosuka, which is a major harbor south of Tokyo, about 20 miles south, 30 miles south of Tokyo. We were inland, and there was no World War II Japanese army camp. We had an old grizzled sergeant who it was like a western town. It had very wide streets with black gravel. There was everything with black volcanic ash because Fujisan, the mountain, was only about 5 miles away. So any place you looked, you saw this huge mountain.
Wow.
And then, but there was ash instead of ordinary soil. I was at Fuji for a year and 2 months, 14 months, as an infantry platoon leader. And that was interesting too. We made 2 landings. We made a landing. It took the whole division and put them in landing craft and took them on ships and then landing craft. And we landed on Okinawa first in the fall, I guess, and then in the spring we landed on Iwo Jima in February, on the anniversary again of the landing in 1945. This would have been 1955. And both were interesting, and I had a platoon and we were playing maneuvers and so on. So I got we invaded Okinawa and we invaded Iwo Jima. And then I came back and I spent my last year in the military. I had a year and a half to do, so I got orders to Washington here. So I lived at home. We were living down on Mason Avenue in Delray then. So I lived at home and worked at headquarters of the Marine Corps, which is actually in Arlington, not very far from where I live. So I did that as a commuter for a year and a half until I'd done my time. Then I was released from active duty. Keith had gotten out after 2 years, and he did not go back to college then. He took courses and so on, but he got a job, and I don't know his job sequence. He had to work for a lot of different countries. I mean, he's always working as electrical or an engineer, and did very well. And then he'd get to go work one place and then get a better job at another place. But they were all, he started out, he was working, he had been in the Air Force in a early warning base in the middle of Pennsylvania called Dallas, Pennsylvania. Named for the vice president under somebody in the 19th century, the same guy that they named Dallas, Texas. But Dallas, Texas was somewhat bigger. Dallas was a small town in Pennsylvania. So he spent his time there. So at the end of his service, he stayed in Pennsylvania for a while, and he opened a radio repair shop and did that for about a year.
Wait, and Keith lived in Pennsylvania and had a radio repair shop in the late 50s? I never knew.
56. Yeah, 56.
So right as he, because Keith was in. So he graduated university in 1954,
All right.
and then he was an officer in the Air Force from approximately 54 to 56,
Yeah.
and then he went to Pennsylvania like 56,
Actually, he just stayed
57.
in Pennsylvania because while he was in the Air Force, he had started organizing this shop,
Mm-hmm.
and he stayed on it, not for terribly long, a year and a half.
Okay.
Then he came back to the Washington area.
Wow, I had no idea.
Yeah, but he did that independently, and it was not an enormous success, but he didn't go bankrupt or anything. He
Yeah.
didn't. It was not a washout, but it was not. He decided it was better to come back home, which he did. But he did. Then he started getting jobs, increasingly better jobs at various Washington area electronic and places where an electrical engineer could find a job. And he did very well at that. And then he got married. He got married actually, and soon after we both graduated in June of 1954, and he was married later that month
Okay.
to Sarah Miles, who he had met at the University of Virginia.
Yeah. Okay, now it's starting to make sense because Marianne told me that she was born in Pennsylvania, and I was like that just really stunned me. But
Yeah.
now it makes sense. Okay.
Yeah, he must have married Sarah. Yeah, that's true. He must have married. Yeah, I remember the wedding. I was best man and all that, but
Yeah.
I can't remember the precise date. But at any rate, yeah, he must have lived in Pennsylvania for a year or two with that shop he had. At least a year, I know, probably 2 years. So that's probably. Mary Ann would have come about a year after his marriage. So that would figure.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then I assume that Sarah was in Pennsylvania with him, and
His what?
that Sarah Keith's wife
Yeah, Keith
was
had,
in Pennsylvania with him.
and when they came back to the Washington area, she was here. But she died, and I don't remember the exact date, but she died young.
Yeah.
And while I think John McDonald, the youngest of Keith's 4 kids, Mary Ann's youngest brother, he was about 4 when his mother died. So
As 4 months or so. I think I think Sarah passed away in 1966, something like that.
that could be. That would be.
'Cause
That sounds a bit late, but it might be.
maybe 65. I know. So John is born in 1965.
John's born in 1970. Okay, well, he said he was about 4 because he vaguely remembers his mother,
Oh, okay.
but only as a 4-year-old, a vague
Yeah.
sort of. So that's probably right. If he was born in 66, you say.
Yeah.
Well, she
Well,
probably died.
Actually, I have it written down on my phone. Let me check. He was born on December of 1964. John.
John remembers service. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, 64. That's 10 years after Keith got out of college, and so it would have been 8 years after he finished the Air Force. So he obviously lived in Pennsylvania longer than I recall, but probably running that shop as he had. But eventually he came back to the D.C. area. So apparently it would have been later than that. So it would have been in the late 60s, 67, 68, something like that.
And okay, so Keith came back. Grandpa came back to the D.C. area approximately 1957.
67, yeah.
67. Okay. And then wait. 57.
Mary Ann was.
Yeah.
She remembers Pennsylvania.
Oh no. That she was born in Pennsylvania,
Okay.
but that
well,
she
was born in 66.
No, excuse me, 55, I think. So,
Oh, okay. Well, yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Well, in that case, I was right the first time.
Yeah, yeah.
Keith left Pennsylvania after a year or so.
Yeah, yeah. I was saying that that John, the youngest, was born in 64. So Marianne was born in 1955, Andy in 1958, my mom in 1959, and then John McDonald in 1964.
Okay. Yeah.
But, okay. Yeah. So Keith came back to the D.C. area in 1957, and then yeah, and then he lived in and around Northern Virginia.
Yeah. Yeah. He was always. We would see a lot of him. So he was always in Northern Virginia, and then not usually in Alexandria, usually in Arlington, but that's not far.
Okay.
And I don't remember, but he lived in a number of houses. But he eventually bought the big house
Mhm.
that he lived in for 20 years, 30 years.
Yeah, in Lake Barcroft.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Lake Park.
What were I'm curious about Keith's career. What were like the significant jobs that he had, where he worked for prolonged periods of time?
Yeah. Well, he worked for a number of electronic companies for several years, maybe 5, 10 years. Then he set up his own company,
Mm-hmm.
which he did for a number of years. That was fairly successful. And I don't remember a whole lot about that, but I remember I was around. I was mostly living away, but I remember his doing that. So he had an electronics company of his own. Did stuff with radar and other things like that. But I don't have a good work history of his. I've got to dig around and see if I can find his records, because I would like to know what that. And if I find it, I'll certainly
Great.
give
Yeah.
it to you.
And also, like, I can also ask like Marianne and John.
Yeah,
and try
Marianne
to-
might be a better source.
Yeah. And then regarding your your life in the 50s and the 60s. So you came back. So your time in the Marines ended in 1957 or so.
No, it was a little later. I went in 54.
Mm-hmm.
I got out in 58.
58. Okay. And then what did you do after the Marines?
I went to Oxford. I
Mhm.
went to England and went to Oxford, and I did a Bachelor of Letters degree, which is a 2-year graduate degree in history and modern history. And I hadn't planned to teach, but I just wanted to spend I'd spent a year in England at school,
Mm-hmm.
and I knew people at Oxford, and I'd visited, and I thought it'd be fun to go there, which it was, and I went there. But then I got a good job at George Washington University, teaching in a special program they had. A friend that I'd known from Oxford was running it, a guy named Bob Jordan, and it was a program for the war colleges and all of the American services, Army, Navy, Marine Corps, Air Force. They all have war colleges. There's
Mhm.
also a National War College. The National War College is here in Washington. And the Air War College is in Montgomery, Alabama.
Mm-hmm.
The Army War College is in Carlisle. And I taught in all these places. The program was a year course, and the university evaluated it and gave them a certain amount of credit, college credit, for the course they were doing, which was an academic course essentially
Mhm.
at the war colleges. And then they took additional seminars,
Mhm.
which I think it's 5 or 6 of them, over the summer before, the summer after, and then during the year. And so this Bob Jordan and myself and others, he would recruit people from nearby. So I taught in that at the Army War College in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, and then at the Air War College in Montgomery, Alabama, and that's where I met Chandler.
Oh yeah.
Her father was the vice commandant of the Air War College, and I met her there, and then we were after, and then I married her there
Yeah.
in Montgomery, and then we moved to Carlisle to the I think we moved to Carlisle for a year to the Army War College, and then to Newport, Rhode Island, to the Naval War College. We liked Newport a lot. We moved back to Newport later. That's a very fine place. So I taught a couple times at the Naval War College. So I had that experience with all this. And so doing that, I decided I better get a doctorate if I was going to teach at university. So I had GI Bill from my Marine Service that paid $110 a month plus another thing. So at that time you could manage all that.
Yeah.
And particularly I went to Oxford to do it, and I lived okay, and I went to St. Anthony's College where I'd been before, and did I had done a Bachelor of Letters before, and I got some credit for that, and did a Doctor of Philosophy, and then I came back and had teaching jobs, first at George Washington and at elsewhere.
Can we so regarding like years and dates, so you first went to Oxford in 58, then
58 when I got out of the Marine Corps, right?
And then
just for a couple of years.
And so you were there for approximately 2 years,
Yeah.
so from 58 to like 1960 or so.
Yeah, about 60.
And then, how long were you teaching in the War College, in the various war
I taught
colleges?
there about 3 years.
Okay.
Because I made the rounds. I think I taught at all 4 of the major war. I don't think I ever taught a whole year at the National War College here, but I taught for a whole year at Montgomery, and in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, and in Newport, Rhode Island.
Okay. What were you teaching in these war colleges?
I was teaching diplomatic history, American foreign policy, from the 20th century, from the First World War on up to the recent past, or mainly from 1940s, from the Second World War.
Okay.
So it was recent history, and that was fun. And the officers were quite interested in this because they had lived through a lot of it. And they were familiar with the thing. So that was an interesting years. And we liked Newport the best of. Carlisle is a charming little town in Pennsylvania, and Montgomery. At that time, they were just beginning to go through their integration or non-integration, and it was not a terribly pleasant place, and the blacks were treated very badly.
Yeah.
It was a typical. It was a deep South town.
Yeah.
And school, everything was segregated. Water fountains, almost. You just did not see blacks in white areas. Lived a separate life. So.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point in time in history that you experienced firsthand, where there was just starting to have integration, right? And it was in the middle of the civil rights movement.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And the integration was just beginning to become, and of course it created a big problem in the South because they could not envision putting their children in schools, black children, or going to the same hospital as black people, or anything where there might be a black person in the next room or next door in the next chair. It was so totally segregated since the end of the Civil War. So it was a remarkable change.
And then in approximately 1964 or so, you went back to England?
Yeah.
Okay. To start your PhD at Oxford.
Yeah, and I spent, I guess, 2 or 3 years, I can't remember, but I spent until probably about 67. I should have checked these dates, but anyway, working on that. I didn't take the degree until several years later because I didn't get time to write it, and so I went back to work teaching. again at George Washington, which was a place where I had taught before, and it was easy to get a job there.
Okay.
So I did that, and then I finished the DPhil, went back to Oxford and was examined and got the degree in 1975, that late, so.
Okay. And what did you do after you finished the PhD at Oxford?
Well, I taught at George Washington. I taught there for several years. I'm trying to think I had taught in that war college program before 1975. So I was teaching on campus. I was teaching for 3 or 4 years. Then I'm trying to think what I did next.
Okay. Take your time. I'm gonna make sure
Yeah.
the recordings. Yep. Good to go.
Still working?
Yep. Yeah.
I'm a little hazy about
Yeah.
after that in the 70s.
Yeah.
I should have checked this. Let's see, did I make any notes on this? I'll have to check and see what my
Okay.
history was, but I was teaching all those years. In the first few years, I was teaching at George Washington. I'm trying to think where else I taught. Actually, I went back to the Naval War College and I directed the program there for several years, and that was very interesting. So I was doing that in the 1970s.
Okay.
At the Naval War College, where I had taught before, just as a teacher, but I was back and had 6 or 8 other professors working for me, and we were running a pretty big program for the naval officers.
Okay.
And as I say, I didn't finish writing my dissertation until 1975, so I resubmitted then and got the degree. So I was fiddling around for those 10 years before, teaching but not writing.
Yeah. Okay.
And I guess I taught my whole career principally at George Washington, in fact.
Okay. Well, yes. I feel like I have a pretty clear timeline of the first 40 years of you and Keith's life. So that's great.
Good. Well,
Thank you. I have some questions about what life was like in the 1930s, in the 1940s. I guess first one like family question that I'm just curious about is
sure.
what was Cecil Perry's personality like, and what was Jeanette's
Cecil Perry.
your father and also your mother, like
Yeah.
what were their personalities like?
Well, they were quite different, actually. They were both very bright, and they had met in college at Washburn University, where my mother went. It was really a college in Topeka, and my father went there too. My father never finished college. He went a couple of years to Kansas State University, then he went to Washburn, where mother was, and that's when he met. I think he got married, and he never finished. My mother did graduate in the class of 1924, and they were married in 1924. I think that's right. Maybe later, but about that in the mid-20s. My father was very practical, and he was hardworking. He had the one big flaw was he was alcoholic. He drank too much. On occasion, he was a binge drinker. He would go along for months
Mhm.
and not drink at all. And then often when he traveled, and he had jobs with the government, with the Quartermaster Corps during the Second World War, where he would travel. And when he traveled, he obviously ran into people, so it started
Yeah.
the social drinking. Now for him, there was no social drinking. You keep drinking until you're drunk.
Mm.
So that was a big problem, and that was a big problem for my mother because she had to hold the family together. And my father traveled a lot. The jobs he got usually required traveling. And he drank a lot, so she had problems managing the finances and managing the family. I mean, we always had a house, and we always had plenty of food. We never really suffered, but she did. She suffered more than we did. For us, we were little kids, and Dad was away, and you didn't worry about it.
Yeah.
And your mother was there, and she was taking care of you, and you were in good hands, and you were going to school, so that was okay. But for her husband was away, and he was probably on a binge, and who knew what debts he was running up, and he often gambled a lot when he was drinking. So in the 30s, I think that was a difficult time for my mother, very difficult, and during the Second War too. It improved after the war. My father went into Alcoholics Anonymous around 1944 or so, I think, and had never entirely cured him of drinking, but it meant they had very long periods in which he did not drink, and when he did drink, he didn't get into the trouble he had before when he was drinking. So it made a big difference in my mother's life, and hence for our life. She was much more stable. But in 1941, she started a job because she was worried about supporting the family. So she got a job at the American Red Cross, and she was very good at it. And I didn't know until later, but she had she was an administrative assistant, which is kind of the bottom level. It's above a secretary, but not a whole lot. And I always wondered why she'd stay there. And it was because she wasn't willing to travel. She had 3 boys, so she didn't want to leave the house, so she would not take a job that required traveling. And at the Red Cross, because they have branches all over the country, you couldn't move up the hierarchy if you weren't willing to travel. So she didn't travel, so she was fairly stationary. But it was a good job, and she earned money and bought a stability that she had not had.
Were either of them outgoing or more reserved?
My mother was very, she was outgoing, but she was a wonderful politician.
Yeah.
If she'd been born 20, 30 years later, she probably would have been a senator. But she was active in women's clubs and so on, and she would always be president or something, or organize things. She was a great organizer and very, very skilled in that kind of thing, and she dealt well with people. So that was her. My father was fairly reserved, always cordial, and always very nice with the boys, and we all was a happy family from our point of view. We didn't share all the struggles that my mother had. And he was very intelligent. And he and Keith had a lot in common.
Oh yeah?
Yeah, because they both, when Keith became an engineer, my father was an engineer, so they both had the similar kind of mechanical and electronic and so on. Whereas Tom, my oldest brother, and I were quite similar. We both had interested in the humanities, the arts, things like that. So he was a philosopher and a historian, and I was an historian, so we were sort of in the same line of business. So I was always close to Keith because we were so close in age. We were always physically close.
Yeah.
Until we went away to college, we were living together for the first 18, 19 years of our life. But Tom was not close to Tom in age. So when I was young, when I was 8, he was 12 or 13. So we were not. But later, when he was in his 20s and I was 19 or so, we had a lot in common.
Yeah.
When I was in college.
What year was Tom born?
Tom was born in, I think, in 1927.
Okay, okay. And when you were a teenager or when you were a child, what were the family traditions that the McDonald family did?
Yeah, that's a good question. We had them, but I can't think offhand what they were. Well, let's take the year, starting with Christmas. We always had a Christmas tree. We always had a
Mm-hmm.
Christmas celebration. We always exchanged presents, all the conventional traditions of Christmas. But it was probably the biggest holiday of the year. And I remember when we moved from Kansas City to Dubuque, Iowa, it must have been about 1939.
Mm-hmm.
And I was very young. I was 5, 6, I guess. But mother was a club person too. She was very active in a club called the PEO,
Mm-hmm.
which is a women's club. It was originally a college sorority, and then it became a graduate club for college women. And she was a lifelong member and was state president and so on. She was very active in that in Alexandria and in Washington. She always had that kind of club life. So she had the respect, and she would, if she was in an organization, she would end up being elected president.
Yeah.
She was the leader that people relied on, and she was smart and experienced and tactful, and she had the leadership qualities.
Maybe that rubbed off Keith during his high school days.
I think it did, yeah. Keith was a good leader during his high school days, and not as active during college. He joined a fraternity at the University of Virginia. I don't think he's especially active, but a lot of guys did that. I don't think he did much fraternity stuff at the USC.
Mm-hmm.
At Duke, he ran track, but he didn't like it. He did. I think his leadership ability became expressed mainly in his working life, because he did very well in his jobs, and he had people working for him. So he had to be able to manage people in that way. But he didn't do that much extracurricular stuff. Like he was in some things, like I think he was a Rotarian. My father had been a Rotarian, which is just a luncheon club, and but he did not do a whole lot of that.
Okay. So regarding family traditions, so I'm sure you guys celebrated Christmas, and I'm sure you celebrated Thanksgiving as well.
Yeah,
regularly?
We did all the usual holidays: Christmas, Easter, 4th of July, Labor Day weekend.
Okay.
Back to Christmas, Thanksgiving.
Yeah, classic
Family.
American family.
Always had a family.
Yeah.
So it was pretty much the conventional thing. I can't think of. We did not, like my family now. We go to the beach every summer. We have since 1981, so forever. We've been going, making an annual thing, and Mary Ann and her crowd, and there was over there 10, 12, 15, 20 of us go down for a week or two, and to North Carolina, southern North Carolina, to the same beach every year, and it's a great. It is a tradition, but my mother started that. She got us to go the first year.
Oh yeah.
But she never. Well, she may have gone one year, but she didn't, and nor did Tom. Tom came down once, but he was in New York by the time we began this in 1981. But the rest of us, Keith and I and our families, which made about a dozen people at least, and then other people. So we did it every year.
Yeah, I remember visiting the beach a few times, and like In the early 2000s. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be right, because we started in '81, and we
Yeah.
did it forever. We still do it.
Yeah.
We're going next summer.
Oh,
We
yeah?
went last summer. So, that's probably the longest lasting tradition, is the summer vacation at Sunset Beach in
Mhm.
North Carolina.
Okay.
The others were pretty much just celebrating what everybody else celebrated, Labor Day.
Um. Okay. I'm curious about World War II and how like living how I was living through that. Right. You were, I guess when it started, you were 9 or so. Or I guess when World War II started, you were approximately 8. When the U.S. was involved, I think you were like approximately 10 or so.
Yeah, I was 9 actually on Pearl Harbor,
Yeah.
7th of December 1941, which was the beginning of the war for us. Although you're right, the war had been going on since 1939 in Europe and since the 1930s in
Mm-hmm.
Manchuria and in China. But the United States got into the war when the Japanese attacked us at Pearl Harbor on the 7th of December. And yeah, that was a major change in our, but it did not really change our basic. Keith and I were both in school,
Yeah.
and you had war bonds and war stamps, and you had a lot of propaganda for supporting the war effort. And I carried newspapers, the delivered papers in Delray, and the papers had a lot of war news and so on. So we were well aware of the war, but
Mhm.
it didn't really, and we had rationing. That was one of the places where you noticed it.
Yeah. What was the rationing?
Well, they rationed essentially canned food,
Mhm.
not all, but most things that were scarce, and meat.
Mm-hmm.
And then again, they rationed gasoline. It started out gasoline, the basic thing was only 3 gallons a week, so you couldn't drive very far on 3 gallons. And then they made allowances for people more gas if you had to commute and so on. But rationing was a fact of life. You had to conform to it.
Mm-hmm.
But it never, for example, we never went hungry. It never really affected our diet even very much.
Mm.
It meant there were some kinds of food you couldn't find, or even if you wanted a steak, it would have been difficult.
Yeah.
If you settled for a hamburger, which we probably would have anyway,
Mhm.
it was okay. You could get hamburgers. You couldn't get special cuts of beef and so on. Pork was more available, and lamb was hard to get. But it didn't. But that was one way. Keith and I were both Boy Scouts during the war, and the Boy Scouts were mobilized for a lot of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Paper drives to collect waste paper, that was a big thing. Scrap collections, tin cans and scrap metal. And so the Boy Scouts did a lot of that, and I think it made a contribution. And the Boy Scouts were always, from the beginning, it always was kind of a paramilitary
Yeah.
organization with the uniforms and the stuff. So it didn't contribute that much to the war effort, but it gave something for boys,
Mhm.
not so much girls, but for boys that felt that they were being part of the war effort.
Mm.
But there was a lot of propaganda about supporting the war effort.
Yeah.
And rationing meant that there were a lot of people that cheated on it, so there was a great effort to try to get people to follow the law
Mm-hmm.
on rationing. But it was not a time of hardship for us, and I don't think, for people who were, if it was a hardship, it was probably their life before and after it was a hardship. If they were very poor, they'd have a hard time during the war, but they had a hard time before and a hard time after. And we had been well-fed before the war, and we were well-fed during the war and afterward. Although there were some things during the war, especially beef, as they say, that you couldn't get much of.
How did your parents talk about FDR And how did your parents talk about?
Well, my parents were, that's something I've always, and it's affected me because they were very staunch Democrats
Mm-hmm.
and great supporters of FDR and of the New Deal and so on. And my father in the early 1930s, when I was very small, he worked for the one of the Roosevelt things in the Depression for the Civilian Conservation Corps, and that took young men from about 17 to 21, and they worked on roads and rivers and canals, doing conservation work and a lot of that, planting trees and so on. And my father was the superintendent of one of the Civilian Conservation Corps, CCC camps, and did that for, I guess, 2 or 3 years, in the beginning of the Depression. No, Roosevelt, we lived through all of the Roosevelt reforms and so on, and we were always strong supporters. And you notice that because when we lived in Monmouth, Illinois, that was a Rockford Republican town.
Mm-hmm.
And so I know when I was at school, we had an election in 1940 when I was there, and I was the only Democrat in the class.
Yeah.
I mean, we all took our politics from our parents.
Yeah.
But I took mine from my parents, and I had to defend FDR from 30 other boys and girls in the camp. Monmouth was the most Republican place I've ever lived.
Mm-hmm.
Once we got to Washington, of course, there was a mix, but lots of Democrats, and it was a much more normal thing to be. But my parents were always strong supporters of Roosevelt, the New Deal, and the Democrats in general. And that with Keith and me, and with our, with Marianne and
Mm-hmm.
all that. So yeah, it goes on. Most of the McDonald clan.
Yeah. How during the World War II, how was news disseminated? Generally, like what were the habits that you had and that your parents had about learning about the news?
Well, the big difference was there was no television, so nobody got their news from television. But radio was big. The main thing though was newspapers.
Mm-hmm.
Newspapers were absolutely crucial. And Washington had 3 newspapers. It has one now, the Washington Post. But it had the Washington Post and the Times Herald,
Mm-hmm.
which was a Republican, based on the publisher of the Chicago Tribune, Colonel McCormick,
Mm-hmm.
who was very Republican. That, and then there was a tabloid, the Washington Daily News,
Mm-hmm.
square tabloid form. There were those 3. And it seems to me there might have been another, but I mean, we have one paper now, but newspapers were your principal source of information. And a lot of the stuff of the information, of course, it came from the government. The war news all was processed by the government. So what you heard was the official line. But it was pretty straightforward. There wasn't much fiddling around, and there wasn't, I don't remember anyone ever feeling that they were being victims of propaganda. And there were enough good newsmen that they wouldn't stand for it, if the government tried to sell a bill of goods, like Trump would. But people wouldn't put up with it. So the newspaper was number 1. The radio was quite important, though,
Mm-hmm.
because people listened to the radio, and it had a lot of news programs, and news breaks and so on. And so if you got the news of, like when the president died, the news got out immediately by the radio.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next day you had a paper where you got an extra that evening with the first people. And I remember when President Roosevelt died, I was delivering papers that afternoon, and one of my customers said, "Did you know that the president
Mm-hmm.
just died?" And I was overwhelmed by it.
Yeah.
We admired Roosevelt, as good Democrats did. And he had got his news from the radio, of course. The next day, there were headlines. And Harry Truman, whom nobody knew anything about,
Yeah.
president.
Yeah, I've heard that. Yeah, that Harry Truman was a no-name type of guy in American politics at the time, and it really surprised
Yeah.
everybody when well, actually, I don't I've heard that like that FDR chose Harry Truman as his successor. Is that accurate or
I don't think so.
okay? So maybe choose is the wrong word, but just that
He did choose him. I mean,
Okay.
It was the president's prerogative to decide who was going to run as vice president.
yeah
And
yeah
he had run with James Garner, who had been his vice president.
Mm.
And he ran with Harry Truman in '44,
mm-hmm.
which is the first election I remember. I vaguely remember 1940 because I was living in Monmouth and I was surrounded by Republicans. But I didn't know anything about politics except that
Yeah.
I was a Democrat and those terrible people.
yeah
So I wasn't really politically conscious. But by 1944,
mm-hmm.
I was in whatever it was, 7th grade or 6th, 7th, 8th grade, and was aware of politics and knew something about it. And I think it was 44 that Truman became, well, yeah, it must have been vice president.
Mm.
And Roosevelt died in April of '45,
yeah
and Harry became president. And turned out to be a very good president, in fact.
Truman.
Yeah.
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 Okay. Okay. I know we've been talking for an hour. I know time flies. Yeah. I think I asked a decent amount of the questions that I wanted to ask. There's like I have so many more questions I want to ask, but I don't want to do too long of a session. Maybe
Oh no, I enjoy talking,
Yeah.
and you know a lot about it, so
yeah.
it's a pleasure to talk about it with you.
Maybe I leave for Kenya tomorrow to go to Paul's wedding.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
I'm off to Africa.
Yes.
Okay.
But I come back in like 2 weeks or so, and maybe we could do this again in late February.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Great.
I'd be happy to. I do nothing but sit around here all day in my
Yeah.
office, and I work. And so I don't go out, so I'm here almost all the time.
Okay.
So I would be delighted. No, I
Let's
enjoy
do
it. I enjoy talking about all this. It reminds me of things. And I'll do a little more research between now and then. I can probably give you more of a timeline
Yeah.
on what we're doing.
Yeah, because I think my initial objective, I wanted to have a really clear view about Keith's life and about your life, right? And
Well, they overlap so much that
yeah.
I'll do them both.
And so far, yeah, I have a pretty good look of the first 30 years of each of your lives.
Yeah.
And yep, and then we'll
Yeah,
we'll
now
look through
with
that.
Keith's life,
Mm-hmm.
I remember things happening, but I don't remember. Like every 5 years he would buy a new house.
Really?
Oh yeah, a newer, bigger.
Yeah.
And so he lived all over for the first 10 years or so. Then he got that big house out in
Lake Barcroft.
Lake Barcroft, and he has that still, I guess, or what did.
Yeah, because I think he lived in Lake Barcroft from early 70s, like 72 or so,
Yeah.
until early 2000, so like 2002.
Yeah,
It's like
so for 30 years.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So that was the long term.